Hello, everyone. Mike Mosquito on location this week at HIMSS Texas Regionals at the Gaylord Texan. I am here with my wonderful co-host, Maureen Nylene, and the wonderful Hal Wolf, the global CEO of HIMSS. Hal, it has been great to watch you on stage again this week. You did a great job keynoting this morning.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. It's wonderful to be here. I was lucky enough to be here at the Texas chapter last year as well. It's an amazing group, and they're so engaged. This is a huge chapter, over 7,000 members, so it's really wonderful to be able to be here.
Yeah. And what I loved and I did not know is the distinction between a society and an association. So for our listeners and our viewers, I think it's a really important point to hone in on because there's a very different pathway.
Yeah, there is. And so the question came up yesterday in a panel we were having, which is why are associations losing memberships? And yet here's HIMSS in the midst of a huge growth spurt. Right. And the answer is that HIMSS is not an association. So an association has a tendency to be very focused either on one discipline or one particular subject matter, and they lobby for that group. HIMSS is a society. Our focus is reforming the global health ecosystem through the power of information and technology. We started in 1961 out of Georgia Tech, and it's grown as a group of individuals and organizations that come together for the embetterment of healthcare and the propagation of digital health as the means to do that. And so we're not one entity. We're not just a CIO, or we're not just a nurse practitioner, even though nurse informaticist is actually one of our largest segments by far.
I know. And I love that statistic too. You said 10% of your...
It's 10% of the total. We're over 125,000 members, and nursing informaticists specifically make up 10% of it. Why? Well, they're the closest to the patient, right? They're engaging with them. They're bedside. They're in the exam room, even more so than the physician, and that responsibility is going up. So that's an example. But the point in the end is that no one group impacts all of care. And so you have to have a society, the old, it takes a village, working together. And so HIMSS was appropriately named a society right out of the gate.
I love it.
That village is getting smaller. You talked about the statistic of the nurse doctors globally, that number's reduced and going to continue to be reduced over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. How do you see that really impacting the U.S. market? You talked about global. You talked about what's happening to our ecosystem of care. That impact was incredible. That number was...
It's already here. I mean, so you're absolutely right. What we're seeing is this double whammy, right? So people are living longer, so the aging of the population continues to grow. So the demand on chronic disease continues to accelerate. The longer they live, you're going to have a chronic disease, and we're better at diagnosing. And the number of primary care physicians, nurse practitioners is shrinking. It's not growing. The U.S. population is starting to shrink. We're producing less individuals. And now if you look at places like Korea, Japan, where it's 0.7 is the reproductive rate versus per 2 people. So this is a big reduction. And so what's happening is we recognize that there's just this gap in the labor force, which is about 8.5 million globally. It's becoming a very competitive market. So what's happening in the U.S.? Some organizations are starting their own medical schools. You look at Kaiser Permanente, they started a medical school. Others are doing the same. Nursing training programs, offering, tuition reimbursement. That's a stopgap. The reality is they're being forced into completely redesigning. AI is going to be a big part of that. And it's being driven by a workforce shortage and the availability of a new information tool we never had.
Which is incredible because I think you had predicted, or at least the World Health Organization said it could be as bad as 18 million individuals that we are short in the healthcare space by 2030.
Yeah. Well, that's 2035.
2035.
That's and still over 10 million in 2030.
Oh my gosh.
No matter which stat you look at.
Right. So we know that we've got to augment with AI, and AI is a great tool.
Yeah.
Europe is already actively using this.
Yep.
There's so many ways that we can leverage what's happening over there and apply it to what's happening in the United States. So when you think of that, what are some of your key thoughts?
Well, what Europe has done last year is they brought two distinct acts forward in the regulatory side. One is called the Data Space Act, which sets up where information is, how you get access to it, and what is the reuse of the data and the information. So they put a regulatory component around that, which is great.
Yeah.
You know, we do the same thing in the US. We think about transport of interoperability. We think about who has the rights to the data. That's important. Now, once the data is available, and also, by the way, they're funding like meaningful use, so they're propagating the utilization of EMRs and other technologies. Then on top of that, we utilize the AI Act, which lays out how AI needs to be used responsibly, what are the governance responsibilities for AI, where it can be used, where it can't be used. And really, that governance model is not just at the delivery of care, but all the way back up through the supplier of the application itself, the documentation, the source coding, where is the information coming from, right? What biases exist? And by the way, the point about AI is there are always going to be biases. It's impossible not to have biases. So the question is, to what degree?
Right.
How
And
do you
where can we
manage
define
that?
it? Exactly.
Okay, excellent.
So generally speaking, Europe thinks on the regulatory body proactively, where we know in the United States, we always have a tendency to be reactive. And by then, as we would say, the horse has already left the barn.
Right.
And so literally, I think we all kind of look to Europe and recognize that they are in advance because it's such an important and big market. We need to pay attention to it. And generally, their regulations come back to influence the US. We adopt most of them. And sometimes we, of course, look up and say, that's not exactly right for this market.
Al, what we talk about government regulation, what government body exists today or should exist to govern that regulation? From your standpoint?
Yeah, well, I think, look, if the FDA is accountable for ensuring that applications that are being utilized within a medical ecosystem meet the criteria, that they establish. And so that's where that governing body sits. I think beyond that, there's a general call for responsible use of AI. So HIMSS itself put out its policy statement on responsible AI, and that came from getting together our advisory groups, our thought leadership, and say, hey, this is new, this is important. What should be our guiding principles for now? And we always reserve the right to get smarter because any regulatory group or any levels of principles need to be tested, pushed against, and then you make adjustments based upon what actually happens in the market. And this has been accelerating so fast that you have to recognize that what was true today may need to be modified for what is tomorrow. And that takes open communication and forums like this, us talking, what you see here at the Texas chapter of HIMSS and the communication and the panels going on, all of that comes back to roost.
I think we're going to see more camaraderie around AI in that government space once they realize that automation is required to care for the individuals holistically, right? I think that's coming.
It's coming. And I think it's going to show itself really in a dynamic change to be effective. So what we've been talking about, and certainly what I've been talking about, is a fundamental scope of practice change.
Yeah.
So if we go back 15, 20 years ago, we made a significant scope of practice change where we took a lot of the functions that were happening at the physician level and we transferred them over to the nurse practitioners because we were putting too much stress on the physician community. And that allowed both groups to practice at the top of their license. That's what scope of practice is all about. Right. We made some adjustments. We had to make regulatory adjustments, permission adjustments, and we had to go through a culture change because that just wasn't the relationship that we had set up 15, 20 years ago. Well, guess what? We talked about the work shortage earlier, and that is going to continue to grow. So we have another scope of practice change. We're going to offload. Well, this is where AI can step in. AI can do a lot of the testing, of monitoring of individuals from their home, from their device, from engagement, collect information, help identify issues that then can be raised to the practitioners rather than practitioners spending a lot of time doing blood pressure monitoring and things of that nature, which can all be done without their direct, engagement. and that frees them up for higher practices. So this is coming. Now, to do that, healthcare systems will look up and say, how do I get reimbursed for it?
Mm-hmm.
And do I have permission to use them to monitor this? And is that application that you referenced earlier approved by the FDA so I can take my blood pressure or hypertension readings from that, those types of things? So that's what's coming. And I think it has to be executed literally in the next 3 years.
Wow. Our media partner for today, Panda Health, they've got an application that helps determine the best applications for an organization. And looking at what they provide, excuse me, it is really about how do you choose. You got the FDA that you're going to have to go to validate before you purchase. But you've got to also app rationalize what you have on the site that can be fed into this digital transformation as well. You've got to get rid of the tech debt. It's that evolution has, you're not going to have the bodies. You're not going to have the clinical suite to be able to support all of that tech debt. So I think that evolution is definitely on top of us.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say that goes back to your equation that you had earlier. I think it was NT plus OO equals COO.
Right. Yeah, developed by Dr. Michael Chase, which is new technology plus old organization equals costly old organization. And I was taught that when I first came into healthcare 20 plus years ago. And it's very true today. And I think what we recognize is that, look, we have an abundance of technology. We will continue to have an abundance of technology. Technology should and does innovation outstrip practical application because it just keeps coming. You have to redesign the workflows and you have to get the cultural barriers out of the way to allow the scope of practice and things of that nature. So it is people, process, and technology have to come together to utilize that new technology. And if you look at failure of any technology implementation, it's because we failed to take advantage of it in the processes and we failed to take advantages of it culturally. That's what'll kill it. And so this is where this all comes down to. And if we're going to move rapidly, then we have to make sure all three are aligned.
It's powerful.
Very powerful. Hal, thank you very much for joining the Buzz Podcast here at Regional HIMSS. I definitely thank you for giving the audience a definite message to take back. We'd like to thank our media partner, Panda Health, and we'd like to thank you for joining the Buzz Podcast. I'm Mike Mosquito along with Maureen Nylene, our special guest, Howell Wolf. Until we see you again, keep buzzing.